today we have, delighted to say, Sarah McMillan, who together with her husband hosts Sterling Neighbour Food and is a social entrepreneur whose new community kitchen and cook school, the kitchen at 44 King Street in Stirling, has been, I think it's fair to say, delayed and moved along by COVID. But she'll talk through some of the other things that the opportunities that have opened up there as well. We'll have a presentation that was pre-recorded by Jules Ryan, who is FEL's Partnerships and Pathways Coordinator. And we'll also have her colleague Richard Chatfield, Forth Environment Link's Wood Reuse Officer, to answer any question. And they'll be talking about how they've been helping the residents of Falkirk in particular during lockdown. But first up, I think I'd like to introduce Robin Tatler to the session. Robin is an independent councillor from Tweeddale East, a board member of the Food Foundation, and in Peebles, together with his team of volunteers, he runs the Peebles Neighbour Food. Robin, can I ask you to briefly introduce the Food Foundation and tell us a little bit about how food has supported resilience in your community and how we can harness some of that demand you've seen for local food, particularly during the lockdown, in the longer term, and what that would mean for Peebles?
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you very much to both of you and to Forth Environment Link for inviting me along to speak on this. What I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about Food Foundation and why we decided to go with Neighbour Food, a little bit about what happened in March and the challenges that we had and the positives and the negatives that we found there, some successes we've had, and where we are now and where we want to go in the future. I think that will hopefully answer some of those questions that you posed me, Stuart. So first of all, a bit about the Food Foundation. As Stuart said, I've been involved in the Food Foundation for the last 10 years. We're a small charity based in Peebles at the Victoria Park Centre, and we are a social enterprise. And I'm talking now about us pre-COVID because things have obviously changed, but we're hoping to get back to the way we were eventually. We're an organisation that provides training and practical experience in catering. We've got a wonderful commercial kitchen at the centre, and we make meals, we make sandwiches, soup. So we deliver these meals. As you'll hear, we switched into delivering a Meals on Wheels service, but that was in March. We make products that we basically sell to shops and to other employers around the town. And at the same time, as I say, we're providing training for people with a range of disabilities, mostly learning disabilities. And that's backed up by an online training opportunity. So people can basically get a range of SVQ qualifications in hospitality and catering. And the idea is that we are preparing people for the world of work or for further training and education. And that's what we've been doing, as I say, for the last 10 years. So Stuart and Stephanie and Forth Environment Link contacted us back in the autumn of last year, I think it was, Stuart, I think, with the suggestion that we might want to look at neighbour food. And I have to say we took to it immediately because it really ticks all the boxes as far as we're concerned. We're all about food. We're all about eating healthily. We're all about sourcing our food as locally as we possibly can. And it benefits the Food Foundation in that we, as a host, we obviously get some hosting fees. That helps our organisation. But it also aligns with what we're trying to do at the Food Foundation, and as I said, in trying to get people to eat healthily and eat locally. So we started the process as I say in autumn of last year, and I think we then had a meeting in February. And at that stage, we were still talking about this is something that we were going to do perhaps in April or May, and then of course March came. And the Food Foundation, immediately had to, well, as of the 23rd of March, had to effectively close everything that we were doing in terms of working with our students and our trainees. And I'm going to use that horrible word, pivoted, but we pivoted ourselves into providing we saw a need in the community, and that was for Meals on Wheels. And so we turned our commercial kitchen into a Meals on Wheels facility. We had fantastic support from our local resilience community group and from the newly formed COVID-19 mutual support group. And between all of those three organisations, over the past, well, I suppose it's 6 months now, we've delivered something like 12,000 meals throughout Peebles and the surrounding area. Because we ended up doing a 7-day-a-week service, 4 days hot meals, 1 day chilled, and two days frozen. But we also decided that it was a good time to consider speeding up neighbour food, because in those first few weeks, as I'm sure you'll all remember, there were challenges for accessing food in supermarkets, panic buying, all those kind of things. And we thought, and people were very wary of actually going to supermarkets at all. And so our demographic in Peebles is that we're quite an older community, and in some ways a more vulnerable community because of that. And so many people were very anxious about going out at all to shop. So we thought that neighbour food would also help with that. So we set it up. The challenges we had, as I said, there were positives and negatives for the timing. Positive, obviously, because we had a really enthusiastic audience, and when we launched our membership, it was just extraordinary. I think we had a couple of hundred members in the first two or 3 days. Stuart, you'll remember this, and we now have, within a few weeks, we had 600 members. People were excited and wanted to try out this new form of online shopping locally. But the challenge for us was that trying to get our local producers involved, they effectively became swamped, because I'm sure everybody had the same experience. They were transitioning from a traditional shopping arena or a market arena to being online, and they were being overwhelmed by demand, and many of them basically said to us, well, we just can't cope with any more demand. However, we got through all of that. We did find mostly local suppliers. We had to go a little bit further out than we had intended, in terms of our bread was from Breadshare, and the cheese was from Lanark, which is a little bit further out from where we'd like to be. But we did get everybody eventually, and the key factor eventually was getting a fruit and vegetable supplier locally, which we did in Innerleithen. And it took off in a phenomenal way. I think we had at our peak about 57 orders a week, which I believe was quite a good response. It was very difficult for us to judge. I think I was checking with Stuart on a regular basis, but we took off really well. Now, we couldn't have done that, obviously, without the support of our volunteers. We had a fantastic team helping us to do the collection and the delivery. Again, we had challenges with that, in that, as everybody has had with their collections, making sure that we were conscious of people's safety all the time. But that all went extremely well. In terms of successes, we've put something like £25,000 back into our local economy through the market so far. In terms of challenges, we still need more people locally to actually use the market. So I said we had about 600 members. Of those 600 members, about 150 have actually used the facility. So we've still got to try and get everybody using it a bit more. Where we're at now is that, like everyone, we had a dip in our market in July and August, but I'm pleased to say we're starting to come back out of that dip. We now have a more local bread supplier, which is fantastic. Tiny little supplier. It's just one guy, basically. Wood-fired ovens in the borders. He's actually, curiously enough, he's in England, because he's literally just over the border, but he's the other side of Kelso. But he's just going from strength to strength, which is fantastic. And a really positive thing for us this week and last week, and probably for another 2 or 3 weeks, is that we've been able to use produce from the community garden, which sits at the back of people at the Victoria Park Centre. There's a community garden run by People's Can, and we've been able to use the produce and the herbs from there, and we're now starting to sell those through the market. And that's absolutely what we want to try and do, and that is definitely the way forward for us. So although we could do with more people taking part, we're slowly, I think, becoming more of the market that we want to be, which is really local and really providing fresh and local food with as little food miles as possible for local people. So I think that's where we're going. In terms of, just to conclude, the experience has been not quite what we imagined at the start, I think it's fair to say, because obviously we had hoped that this, as well as being a facility where people would get access to local producers, we thought it would be more of a social there would be more of a social aspect to it. Now, unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet, but that will happen. As Stuart and Stephanie know, we at the very beginning had hoped that the cafe, we were developing a cafe at the same time, and we'd hoped the cafe would become a social a facility for people to socially interact, and with the producers and our collection nights would be more of a social event. That hasn't happened yet, but that's something that we're hopeful for the future. I think that's all I want to say at the moment. If there's any questions, happy to take them.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Robin. I think I've got a few questions, but we'll have any questions at the end. And obviously, if anybody else wants to jot their questions in the chat box or just hold on to them until the end, we can catch up with you then. But thank you so much. It's been brilliant to hear. Steffi, are we doing Sarah next, or do you want to? Yeah, fantastic. Sarah. So Sarah McMillan. You took over the Sterling neighbour food from us, Forth Environment, back in January this year, when we had no idea what was down the road for any of us. Can you tell us a little bit about your social enterprise, the kitchen at 44 King Street? What plans you had for it, and obviously how that changed during COVID, and how you've adapted during this time, and yeah, bring us up to speed with where you'd like to be as well.
44 King Street is it's an old department store. It was an old department store in Stirling, and in October 2018 the department store closed down, and there was no chance of the building sort of being used as retail after that. But fortunately for Stirling, local arts charity Creative Stirling took the lease on the building to set up a community hub, a community arts hub. And Jo Hall, who is Creative Stirling, is someone that I've worked with quite extensively in the past. So when she let me know what she'd done, I had asked if there was any possibility that we could have a bit of space in the building to set up a community kitchen. Jo thankfully said yes, and we started down what has been quite a process. But when we got into the space, and started to tell people what we were looking to do, almost everyone that we spoke to asked if there was going to be cookery classes, and it became really clear really quickly that we could fill the community kitchen with classes every day of the week, all day. So I went back to Jo and I asked if there was any way that we could have more space and we could put in a small cook school. So the vision of the kitchen at 44 has grown considerably since the very beginning. We're going to have a community kitchen with a beautiful dining room, a small 8-person cook school, and to top it all off, quite literally, we have flat roofs, and we have ambitions to plant a tiny rooftop veg farm. So back in February this year, we took receipt of a donation from Gleneagles Hotel, which was 10 domestic kitchens, which we are going to rejig together to fit into the teaching cook school. So we got them on the 23rd of February, and we're in the process of applying for building ordinance to knock walls down, when obviously things started to turn slightly strange. And as we progressed through March, it started to become really, really clear that any plans that we had were going to have to go on hold. During this entire planning stage, Forth Environment Link had got in touch several times, but one of the most exciting things that they got in touch about was obviously the neighbour food market. Their ambition when they set up the first neighbour food market in Stirling was always that they would find a community home for it. And the aims and the ambitions of my community interest company fit very well with promoting healthy, local, sustainable food. So it's a perfect match for us. So I took the reins on Neighbour Food Stirling on the 19th of January. And do you know, I let things roll just to test out the waters. And we had 4 very changeable weeks in the first month. Do you know, selling from £750 one week down to 330 on the 20th of February. So, do you know, we looked at what was happening and what it was that we wanted to do with the market and how we wanted to grow it, when all of a sudden it started to grow itself. Exactly a month later, 19th of March, we were selling well over £1,000 as the situation in supermarkets led people to actually investigate themselves other ways in which they could buy food. Then obviously lockdown happened, and by the 26th of March we were up at over £2,500 worth of sales, which is extraordinary. Really, it's a 1 month difference. And what we had initially thought we were taking on had exploded, absolutely exploded. So to add to our workload at the time, Forth Environment Link had also sent me an email that week from an organisation called Neighbourly, and Neighbourly are a third-party organisation who put supermarkets and suppliers in touch with organisations who might be able to use surplus food. And Neighbourly put me in touch with Marks and Spencer's in Stirling. And on the 21st of March, we made our first journey down to Marks and Spencer's in Stirling to pick up their surplus food. We managed to collect enough food to fill 3 trestle tables with food, and we started to make some phone calls within our local community, just to say, look, we have some free food here, some lovely things, really lovely things from Marks and Spencer's. If you would be able to use any of this, please feel free to come and collect. And we successfully got rid of all of our Marks and Spencer's food, and we went back the next day and the day after that. Now, we had also, in the process of setting up the kitchen at 44, had been speaking to another local organisation, Transition Stirling. And Transition Stirling, the kitchen at 44, and Stirling Council Sustainability Officer Julie McPhee had got together to apply for a tiny grant from Stirling Council to set up a community fridge. And at the time, when I'd looked into community fridges, do you know, they literally were, do you know, one small fridge full of food. I had no concept just how large food redistribution projects could grow, but we did find out very, very quickly. Julie had been successful in securing us £5,000 worth of funding, and that was sitting there available for us at the end of March to use. So we had that to help us set up a food redistribution project. And do you know, as I mentioned that initially, I have just had a 5-minute warning. I'm about 4% into my story, I'm afraid. I'll speed it up. I had lost the plot. Sorry. Right, where was I? Oh, right, our £5,000 funding. So we managed to buy fridge and a freezer. And we continued each night to pop down to Marks and Spencer's. Now, Marks and Spencer's was hit quite strangely when all of the supermarket shelves were being cleared in Sainsbury's and Tesco's and Morrison's. Marks and Spencer's was being ignored by an awful lot of people because you can't do a huge, big, holistic shop in it. Do you know, you're cleaning stuff, your toilet rolls, the all-important toilet rolls, they weren't there. So 1 week into our collections from Marks and Spencer's, we managed to actually collect a metric ton of food between Stirling and our Dunblane store, which is just 2.5 miles up the motorway. So by that point, we had very quickly established ourselves as a source of food for people who had been hit in a way that they had not seen coming and not envisaged. Many people at this point had been made redundant. The furlough scheme had not kicked in. Cash flow for self-employed people had hit issues, and an awful lot of people who had never imagined that they might be in a position where they did not know where they were going to get dinner from that evening, had a place to go to pick up food. 44 King Street, as I mentioned before, it's an arts hub. It's a beautiful space, and we were doing it well. So the food project was born in that last week in March, and it has continued throughout the whole of lockdown, and it's still going today. And today we've redistributed over 33 tons of food to over 5,000 people, with absolutely no charge to anybody. We recruited over 30 volunteers to run the project with us. And we're hoping that what we will be able to do is to grow that into a food co-op, and provide low cost fruit, veg and essentials going forward. And we're currently working on securing funding for that. But coming back to neighbour food, because obviously I've only really covered the first week of lockdown. Neighbour food exploded in the exact same way as yours did, Robin, in Peebles. We also, we hit issues as well. We had problems. There wasn't a single bit of fruit and veg that we managed to sell throughout the entire period of lockdown that was grown in Stirlingshire. By the second week in April, our meat producers had nothing left to give us. So although we were hitting phenomenal numbers of orders, and we were serving a huge number of customers, we absolutely failed to meet basic needs with the neighbour food market. Our producers who we would need, I think, to be in a position to offer a balanced diet, they just weren't there. We have a fantastic range of bread producers who did a phenomenal job. We have an amazing egg supplier, so we did have some tremendous success stories. And at the height of it all, our biggest order in the middle of April was 111 orders, where we sold just short of £3,000 worth of food. The other 2 points that probably I think are really important to make is that the whole operation succeeded because of volunteers. And I think if we're looking to try to build in sustainability into a system to build resilience within our food supply in Stirling, we can't build the system on volunteers. We have to have employed people earning a fair wage at all points. An operation cannot grow to meet substantial needs if we're relying upon free labour. I'm not convinced that the economics of neighbour food would support, even in our highest earning weeks, the way that the market operates. I don't think the number of hours involved in actually operating a 2-hour pickup necessarily would cover the cost of paying a fair wage to each and every person involved. And the other point as well is the producers are obviously, they're paying us for a service, and I think in paying us they expect that we provide the service, and there wasn't a community spirit within our producers. I worked 2 very, very separate projects. One of them was very, very community-based and volunteer-driven. And the other one was obviously, it was selling a service. I was quite shocked to discover that that's simply what my producers imagined I was doing. And there wasn't a community of producers coming together to actually support each other, to support the market, to make sure that it happened. That was a huge disappointment, a real disappointment. And I think, you know, if neighbour food were to form part of a resilient solution to meeting local food needs, then that aspect would need to have serious consideration.
No, thank you, Sarah. That was absolutely fantastic. So I was jotting down a few really important points that you've made there, which I'm keen to come back to at the end. But I think we're next going to hear from our Forth Environment Link's Pathways and Partnerships Officer, Jules, who's not with us today, but we've got a pre-recorded presentation. Hopefully, if the screen share works okay. And then we have Richard Chatfield, our Woodrees officer, who's been instrumental in this project to answer any questions at the end.
I'm going to talk to you very briefly about Veg or Ledge, which was a cross-pollination project by Forth Environment Link. So I wanted to take you all back to when this all first started, which I'm sure seems like years and years ago now, but just to provide a wee bit of context in relation to why the project got up and running in the first place. So I'm sure many of us recall scenes like these being played out in our local supermarkets and our local shops. Things like panic buying and the inability to access food easily became a very real issue for all of us virtually overnight. But speaking specifically about Falkirk, this was a very serious cause for concern because Falkirk already has a very high level of food poverty. Now, don't get me wrong, there was lots of work being done by the third sector and local authorities in terms of emergency food provision, but that wasn't the only issue that community faced. Things like social isolation, mental health and well-being were also affecting many people. And so through that, we were able to identify a need and harness the apparent appetite for community food growing, which we'd been made aware of during this time. And in this way, we knew that focusing on a project that enables community groups to learn a new skill whilst feeding themselves and the benefits that they can have through growing their own would resonate with our community. Now, lockdown wasn't easy for any of us. I think it's fair to say that we all had to give up certain freedoms. And because normality had been turned upside down, many of us looked to nature and to our local environment to provide a sense of comfort. So suddenly those of us who had access to a garden or a local green space were in a very privileged position indeed. Nature and our local landscape in many ways became the antidote to lockdown. But what about the thousands of people and families that don't have this access? And this is really where Veg or Ledge came in. Now, let's not forget that this was a time of extreme stress. Redundancies were happening left, right and centre. Kids were off school and suddenly in our houses 24 hours a day. We had no sense of routine. And on top of all that, the inability to socialise and be with our loved ones was very, very stressful. Lockdown was a melting pot of stress and anxiety. So we wanted to initiate a project that harnessed a sense of community, a project that promotes health and well-being, and importantly, provided our communities with a sense of power. What was really great about this project was it really was a team effort from the word go, and I think this really added to the success. Now, as Partnerships and Pathways Coordinator, it's really up to me to make sure I spread the word and get as many people interested as possible. And for this, I used CVS's third sector interface meetings, which were happening on a weekly basis during lockdown. And that was really a space for third sector organisations to come together, albeit virtually, but a safe space where they could discuss any issues they were having, talk about new projects, funding applications, that sort of thing. And so for me, this was the perfect platform to engage with a diverse range of community organisations, many of whom had never heard of Forth Environment Link before. And of course, social media played a crucial role in enabling us to spread the word. As Clara had mentioned at the start of lockdown, social media became our voice, and it very much did in terms of Veg or Ledge. And we witnessed a rise in the amount of people engaging with our content. So through these multiple channels, we were able to form partnerships with the likes of NHS Forth Valley, Falkirk City and Refugee Group, Strathcarron Hospice, Outside the Box, and many food banks and food pantries, to name a few. So how did we develop the project? So I've mentioned that this was a team effort, but I do have to give credit to Richard for the success of Veg or Ledge. It really was full on from the word go, and whilst myself and Kel's team did our parts in terms of getting people interested, Richard was the only person that was making the veg kits from scratch and then working out the logistics of how to deliver the kits as well. So credit where credit is due, I feel. And you probably can't read the text at the side there because it's pretty small, but I have likened Richard to Superman. And it's true. There was a staggering amount of orders coming in on a daily basis via email, phone calls, Facebook. And at times, it did feel like it was quite hard to keep up with the demand, but it was clear that this was a project that held a lot of weight within our locale and beyond. And for me, and I'm sure everybody involved, it felt very humbling to know that we had initiated a project that really fulfilled a need within our community. Throughout the duration of the project, there wasn't really a quiet spell, and I'm sure Richard would agree with that. Due to the ongoing network through the CVS platform, a lovely piece in the Falkirk Herald, which Leslie had put together for us, and numerous updates on social media, the orders just kept stacking up. I would even go as far as saying that had we had unlimited time, staff capacity, resource, money, this was a project that we really could have taken nationally. It wasn't just Falkirk that were interested, it wasn't just Forth Valley. I was getting queries from all over Scotland asking how they could get involved. So certainly one to maybe come back to in the future, I would say. So getting to the nitty gritty, Veg or Ledge was very much a project that was born out of COVID. It was a response to trying to fulfil a community need during that time. And the project ran for 8 weeks, and in total we managed to engage with 25 community organisations, many of whom, as I've mentioned, had never heard of us before. Of those 25 organisations, a whopping 232 veg kits were gifted out to community members. And to put those numbers in perspective for you, that's 29 kits per week, every week, for 8 consecutive weeks. So again, kudos to Richard, because that really is a staggering amount of orders to fulfill. As I've mentioned, this was an exemplar project in terms of cross-pollination between myself, Reuse and Repair, and the Food and Growing team, all working together to deliver a shared outcome. And this also led to service users from other community groups accessing our other project areas. So coming in through the Veg or Ledge door, but then actually finding out about the CCF project, or finding out about Forth Bikes or other active travel projects that were happening. So I think that was really good, and of course that raises the profile of FEL more generally, which is what we're always wanting. So yeah, brings us to the last slide. I'm sure we can all agree, or I hope you agree, this was a project that did have a positive impact on our community. But what about the legacy? Well, Richard, you will be very pleased to hear that Veg or Ledge is set to return to our communities at some point next year. I think, joking aside, when you have a project that's been that successful, it would be foolish not to allow more people to get involved. So we don't know what form it will take. It might be working with other partners. It might be working with other members of the team, but in some guise, it will return. So what I would say is watch this space. But probably the most important element to come out of this project, in my opinion, was its ability to empower communities. Growing your own is is very much a way of handing back control to people. Those that were involved have learned a key skill, one which they can use again and again. And moreover, the collective health benefits that have been reported through case studies and Facebook comments have been very heartwarming. And it's been, for me, a real privilege to know that FEL have played a part, no matter how small that part may be, but we have collectively played a part in helping our communities get through a time of collective stress and anxiety, giving them something to nurture and something to care for when it counts the most.
That was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for playing that for us, Stephanie. I think what I'm picking up, and I'd like to open the floor for questions to any of our speakers. But I think one thing I'm picking up is that there isn't one solution. It has to be a package of things that comes together, and also that people have to come together as well, and not be just concerned about what they're doing, but be a bit more community minded, I guess, is one of the things I'm picking up from here. So Robin mentioned it was a bit of a shame that the cafe space couldn't be there to add a social aspect to the food. Gathering around and food just go together, and that's something that COVID has to an extent robbed us of. I think social isolation is a real issue there. So I get the sense from Peebles that a package of bringing people together in ways, and I know that Robin, you may say that you're being able to find ways of doing that now, added to the food that brings things together. I think what I picked up from what Sarah was saying there was the kitchen at 44 was able to kind of go out and pull different initiatives together and bring them into the one space, work with different partners to fulfill various community needs. And in some cases there were challenges there where for example the producer community, I think this has been quite widely reported, the producer community of small producers lacked capacity to actually kind of meet the demand that was being found among people. People were demanding local food, but the local producers were running out of capacity. But also perhaps they weren't working together as well as they might have been, which is a real shame, and perhaps that was lacking from that community. And I think what we got from hearing Jules talking there was about how we could bring some of the nature indoors and some of those things indoors to people who perhaps didn't have access to some of those other aspects of that we've heard about, markets, and being able to get out and enjoy our hours exercise or our exercise in different ways. So I think what I'd really like to kind of ask from my side is, what does the future hold for you guys, or what's happening at the moment that is kind of maybe kind of plugging some of those backs, or bringing some of those different aspects such as neighbour food and other parts of your work together to provide a more holistic approach?
I'll come back on that, Stuart. So we now have a wonderful outdoor cafe at the back of the Victoria Park Centre, and it backs onto the garden, which was fantastic, and people are using that now while the weather's okay. Eventually, hopefully, we'll be coming indoors as the weather changes. But I'm hopeful that we'll be able to use that to maybe do some social interaction outside to start with the producers. So we are still hopeful that we can do that, connecting the producers to the customers bit. But it's still challenging. The whole environment at the moment is still challenging. Can I say as well that, I mean, one thing I want to just comment on is the 20% cost is still definitely an issue for producers, and I don't know whether that's something that we can look at in some way. But it does, for small producers, it's quite a challenge to their business model to have that 20%. I mean, I know why we need to have that. Obviously, the host needs something, the neighbour food need their costs covered, and I need to make something, and the payment producers. But if there's any way we can reduce that at all, that would be really helpful.
Can I jump in on that one, Robin? Because I think I think there's a re-education needed, and I think fair pay for fair work is vitally important. And people talk about how food is too cheap, which I think is something that is quite definitely true. And if you compare the price of one of the loaves of bread that you sell to an in-store bakery equivalent, the price difference is probably considerable. But the price of selling as well, I think, has fallen away in the journey to get to cheap food. The supermarkets have cut out that aspect as well. Do you know, and there were some weeks when I totted up the number of hours involved in actually running the neighbourhood market. Our busiest week, there was 36 hours of labour involved in actually running the market and doing the 53 deliveries that we did that week. Now, if we had charged at that point, we weren't charging for deliveries because the deliveries were being done by volunteers who donated not just their time but their petrol and the wear and tear on their car. So we got our 10%, so we got £280, and I didn't take any money from the market at that point, but we did employ one person to work 3 hours, which costs the kitchen at 44 over 50 quid. Now, if we're paying over 50 quid for someone to work 3 hours, that £280 is going to disappear in an instant. And I think producers actually require, people talk about how individuals need to know how much food actually costs. I think producers need to learn how much selling costs as well. Because if a system is going to be resilient, everything and everyone in that system has to work perfectly. Do you know, and along the way we have lost the awareness of parts of the system. And I do understand that small producers have to be able to make a profit, but they have to be able to price properly and they have to be able to justify. And if people aren't then able to afford to buy, then perhaps that producer shouldn't be producing in the method and the way that they're doing. They are not a resilient entity. And along every process, everything needs to be fair. And if we squeeze down that 20%, we're squeezing ourselves.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, and fair wages, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're a living wage employer. We're 100% behind the living wage. We've got nobody takes any wages at all in our organisation for it at the moment. One of the things I'm looking at though is the new Kickstarter program, and we're hopeful actually that we might get a young person in to come and take it on as a sort of development opportunity for 6 months, just to get some experience as well. But yeah, you're right. I get that. I think it's when there are other opportunities for producers as well to sell at a slightly lower cost. That's where you've got a challenge. So, for example, the market in the town has now started up again on a Saturday morning, and they're not charged anything like that amount to be in that have a market stall. And then a number of them went and have their own online route to market, which is obviously a lot cheaper than ours. So
their own online route to market, but if they're going to sell at a market stall, it's their choice at that point to be the labour behind their own sale, and they have to be willing to pay for that same labour. Do you know, if they stand at their market stall for 4 or 5 hours, do you know, they should not expect is what I actually mean. They should not expect someone else to do that for free just because they imagine that they're doing it for free. And that's an aspect of re-education that's required.
So Marion, so you've got your hand up there. Could you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just, it's not strictly a question, but so Steffi and Stuart know that I'm trying to set up this neighborhood market down in Dumfries and Galloway, and that my project also had to be speed up by lockdown happening. And what I found, everyone can hear me, yeah? Yeah, okay. Well, what I found as the lockdown developed is that first there was panic from the producers. As I approached a few organizations, I was told a lot of the time, but actually at the moment, producers struggle with mental health and, you know, around insecurity. And I just couldn't understand what I was being told because I came here with a solution, you know, but then, you know, I started to approach producers myself, and like the issue of the 20% was very much a lot, something that came up in the conversation a lot. And some people said, this is my VAT, you know, I can't charge VAT twice, you know. And I didn't really know what to reply to that, because although I want to put all the profit back into the community and maybe educational projects and stuff like that, I couldn't deny that I needed a little bit myself, you know, because the thing is like, and I mentioned to you guys before that, yeah, no, I can't work for nothing, you know, it's just like, so it was a bit tricky. And then the other thing as well, which really irritated me a little, is like a lot of producers managed to find their own solutions, which were not community orientated. So, for example, having customers at the farm gate was something totally acceptable for a producer, but it's not easy for consumer. So what happened with my neighborhood is like I had a lot of members signing up to the system very quickly, just like Eurobin, but maybe less people. But within 10 days, I had like well over 50 people wanting to come onto the market. And I had one producer, and then this person called me after a week saying, I have nothing to sell because everyone is coming to the farm gate. So that's how I completely stalled. And so to just conclude on this point, which is very recurrent where I am, it's not so much that I can't sell the market efficiently enough to the producer, it's just producers are maybe like finding very hard to do that switch for the benefit of the community, rather than just like trying to sell their produce. So I was in that conference I mentioned to you just last week with a local producer that does gin, local gin, so alcohol. So in itself, it's a little bit tricky to sell on the neighborhood, but because they are a well-established, you know, a local producer, I thought it would be nice to have their produce, you know, on offer on the neighborhood. And when I was on the phone with him, he kept saying that, you know, he was selling through Amazon and John Lewis, and, you know, like he couldn't possibly on community for the same kind of like very advantageous prices. So I kept asking him, how much is Amazon buying a bottle of you? And he kept saying, I'm sending 800 bottles to Amazon a month, so it doesn't really matter, you know, how much I sell them. And I was like, but yes, it does matter, because you're never going to sell 800 bottles in a community a month, you know, but you're giving, you know, you're giving that opportunity to Amazon. So, and then for the wee story, actually, I Googled on Amazon to try to find their products, and they don't even sell them in the UK. They sell them in USA. So it's like, what can you reply to that, you know? So Stuart said to me, well, what you can reply is like, well, maybe you don't need a gin producer on your neighborhood, which is really, you know, it's like, but then, you know, it's like one of those things, you know, I mean, we had a similar problem with the local bakery, same thing, you know, that they're doing very well with others. But, you know, so yeah, it's a bit of a catch-22 for us. Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Marion. I'm really keen. We're just about to run over time, so I want to just see if there's any other questions from anybody else here. If not, I'm going to just throw one question at Richard, our wood reuse officer at FEL. So I think we've heard a little bit about emergency food. I think we've heard about supporting food producers and providing a service for those food producers in getting that food to out there to our local communities. But I'd like to know a little bit more about the growing aspect and what impact that has had from your experience in Falkirk, Richard.
Well, the majority of the feedback that we got, we worked with a whole range of different organisations. A lot of them were sort of health and well-being, mental health support groups, dementia groups, assisted housing, and that's so various organisations were using it for different purposes, clearly. But amongst those groups were several community hubs within Falkirk who also run food banks from the hubs. And the one in particular, the biggest response to Veg Ledge, one food hub took over 50 boxes just themselves. So this seemed to chime with a kind of feeling within the community that they were already keen on ideas about growing their own food. And the Veg Ledge initiative sort of provided a sort of spur or a momentum to that. And it now appears that 2 of those hubs have now instigated a community growing space, for which we put them in touch with the Falkirk Council and hope to be involved heavily in that as it progresses. So there's clearly an appetite within the community for people to do this themselves. I know that the other speakers are coming more from the perspective of the food market, but it would appear also that there's a need within local communities to go directly to themselves and cut out any other processes that would appear and do things directly themselves. So that's encouraging from that point of view, and I think probably, I mean, with the feedback that we've had and the kind of general reading, and also the experiences of the other food markets, it would appear that there's a pretty untapped appetite out there for this to grow and just keep growing exponentially, I think. And whether it's met through local markets, direct community growing, and a kind of realisation amongst, I think probably all supermarkets are clearly in a position to tap into this as well. Their organic markets are growing hugely and whatnot. So there's huge demand. So it's maybe a question of trying to do our best to meet it. You know.
Fantastic. I mean, there was certainly from what Jules was saying, an ambition or maybe a demand to do this nationally, and I'm sure that people can come and talk to your team about if they want to instigate a similar program in their areas. Come and talk to you about what you've learned along the way and how they might do that. Thank you so much, Richard. I think we've heard a lot about community today from lots of different aspects, whether it's just keeping people fed, whether it's just reaching out to the community, whether it's supporting businesses in the community, or struggles with that in all of those things in some cases, and also just keeping ourselves mentally being aware of our mental health and the impact that food and nature has on that, and engaging with our food has on that. I think I've heard from many that actually just getting out during COVID to do a food shop, whether that's at a market to pick up food you've pre-ordered, or just to get out to a shop, has been somebody's highlight of the day so much of the time. So you know, food has really been, like it is with so much of our lives, that the common thread we've had through COVID, and presented opportunities in our communities and also challenges as well. I'd like to thank our speakers, Sarah McMillan from the kitchen at 44 King Street in Stirling, Robin Tatler from the Food Foundation in Peebles, and Jules and Richard from FEL for sharing their experiences. And please do follow up with any questions you have by email, and we'll get them out to our speakers and get responses out if you'd like that. As I say, you can catch up with this or any of this that you missed, or tell your friends about it on our YouTube channel. I think in a few days, a couple of weeks at the latest, it will be up on our YouTube channel. And do look out for more events this week as part of our Gather Round Local Food event season. Thank you very much all for tuning in.
Thanks.